Hello, brain enthusiasts from across the globe. Have you ever questioned statements like, we only use 10% of our brains? Or, our memory works like a reliable video recorder? If so, you're not alone. Brain myths have misled many, impacting health decisions and social perceptions. So, it's time to set the record straight in our Brain Myths Debunked podcast. I'm your podcast host, Milena Krastenskaya, or simply Dr. K, a neuroscientist and neurotechnologist. Let's explore the controversies and misconceptions surrounding our brains together. Dear listeners, welcome to another exciting episode of Brain Myths Debunked, the show where we break down misconceptions about the brain and human behavior using the latest scientific research. Today, we're tackling one of the most persistent and misleading myths out there. Men are better at math than women. Is it true? Are there any biological basis to support that? Joining us to dive into this topic is Dr. Elena Saillas. Dr. Saillas is an expert in math cognition, and her research spans diverse fields, including language processing, developmental disorders like dyscalculia, and even the role of bilingualism in math. She is here to help us unravel the truth behind this myth. Welcome, Elena. It's a great pleasure to have you on our podcast today. Can you please introduce yourself and let our listeners know where you're joining us from what part of the world?
Nowadays, I'm in Spain. I'm back in my home country, and I'm an associate professor in the University of Zaragoza, which is the university of a community called Aragon in Spain, which is the north of Spain. And yeah, I teach language processing, neuroscience of language, but my research, as you said, has been very based on math cognition. And for a long time, I merged it with bilingual processing. So I come, in fact, from psycholinguistics initially, and I had the opportunity to join these two areas. And I've been studying also math reorganization in the brain. And since 10 years ago or so, a bit more, I've been working also on brain tumor and cognitive functions, etc. Well, I'm from Spain, but as Milena knows, turning around the globe for a while. And I've been doing these things in several places, in several countries. So,
Yeah, thank you very much for your introduction. Can you tell us a little bit about the place where you are working, University of Zaragoza? What is it known for? What type of research in neuroscience and cognitive domain is going there?
well, Ramon y Cajal came from Aragon. Ramon y Cajal is Aragonian. Here, in fact, the approach is a bit more clinical. I'm more used to the cognitive part of the mind. But as you know, things can be approached from different views. Well, there are a lot of research in clinical. Then there are also colleagues that study attention. There are colleagues that with me study some parts of dyscalculia. And well, my colleagues even study the cognitive process behind driving. There is a very nice project here going on that, how optimize driving even in public transport. So that's a very nice idea. And there are also people in the field of neuropsychology, again, a bit more clinical than cognitive. I know the people from the Faculty of Social and Human Science, which is here in Teruel, in Aragon, which is a campus dependent of the University of Zaragoza. There are 3 campuses, as many universities, one in each province in Aragon. But I know the research of my colleagues that are close to my office. So, yeah.
Thank you for this introduction. We basically see a little part of Spain where,
Exactly.
this very
Yeah.
interesting research is going on.
There is even people, this is in Zaragoza, studying discourse analysis based on artificial intelligence, for example. This is very nice as well. I got involved on that, There is a lot of activity, but more of what I think I would like to highlight in this faculty is the kind of link between the academic staff and the students. So there is a very direct communication. Of course, everyone in the place. So it's kind of circular. The teacher is a bit more uncomfortable, I guess, because one wants to control the thing, and with a bit of hierarchy, it's more comfortable for the teacher. But again, I think for learning, this is a very good approach we take. So the communication is very fluid. So
Thank you for all this information. And the first question I want to start our conversation with is math cognition. I'm sure that some of our listeners may even not heard about this topic. What is math cognition?
Well, math cognition is the part of cognitive psychology or cognitive neuroscience that studies the system that allow us to do mathematics. I can describe a bit the math system if you want. Okay, the math system is a very complex system, but has essential components, which allows, first of all, to compare approximate numerosities. And this is common to non-human species and to preverbal infants. So this could be the core numerical processing, what is in the core of the system. This is located in parietal areas. And of course, there are more things about apart of that. When the symbolic system is acquired, the numerical system is acquired, then this system must match the numerical symbol. And that requires visual areas that connect to the parietal lobe, and then through a certain white matter connections. Then we, of course, have a more verbally based system within math, which allow us, for example, to retrieve arithmetic facts. We require this system to, for example, say 2 times 3 is 6. We retrieve it verbally and relies a lot on classical verbal areas, which are perisylvian temporal. So, and as you know, language is not only in the left hemisphere, but a lot of the language system is lateralized to the left hemisphere. So, as well, the subpart of math is lateralized on the left hemisphere mostly, although we have shown recently that is not so clear. And for doing arithmetics, we need the both hemispheres, and each hemisphere does a different thing. And then we have the core numerical system, we have the verbal system, we have these areas visual format, which are the numbers, the Arabic numbers that match the approximate number system, the core numerical system. And then we have also very important component, which is in line with of the topic of today, which are the visuospatial component of the numerical system. At some point, there is debate, and there is very recent study that address when this appears and which are the possibly biological basis of this link, but numerical processes linked to visuospatial system in the form of what is called mental number line, in which we represent in our mind the small numbers on the left space and the right numbers on the right space. In a sense that, for example, a small number such as 1 shifts your attention to the left, a big number such as 9 would shift your attention to the right. In a sense, there is like a mental number line that we develop with culture or no, or there are some predisposition to do that. Parietal areas where the core number system is also the basis for visuospatial abilities, an important part of those. There are different explanations of this, but in any case, the link is there. And also, as you know, if you imagine a math book, there is a lot of spatial stimuli there, right? So the Cartesian axis, etc., have a spatial component, so are purely spatial, in fact. This would be the main numerical system. But of course, this system, and especially when the math processing requires more complex processings, when the math problem is more and more complex, evidently this cannot work alone. So this is surrounded by many but other systems, such as attention, working memory, I talked before about language. So in a sense, to do math well, we must have the math system in place, but also other systems. As you know, no task that we do is specific to one specific cognitive systems. So this is more or less the basis of the numerical processing, of the mathematical processing.
Yes, and the system looks so complex. When we're doing math, I don't think we even are imagining how complex is the system and that it involves so much. So, for example, if something happens along the way in any part of those systems that support these processes, what can happen?
Since the system is so complex, there is a variability in the kind of math disability or dyscalculia that would be the problem in math learning, a variability in those difficulties. So if the approximate number system is altered, then we would have a very pure form of dyscalculia or math problem. No? If, for example, we have a lesion or we have a problem in the way we manipulate phonemes or we use this phonological loop, if I can say it technically. So it would be like the way we maintain this verbal information in memory, okay? If we have a damage in those circuits, then between other things, we will have a problem in arithmetical retrieval and in arithmetic acquisition. If, for example, there are comorbidities with dyslexia, I mean, it's very frequent. So it's more likely to have dyscalculia if you have dyslexia than if you don't have. That doesn't mean that they come from the same problem, but they can be comorbid, okay? As well as with ADHD, for example, if you have a problem in attentional capacities, we could have also a problem in math. Again, they can be co-occurrent, sometimes coming from the same problem and sometimes they just co-occur. Or if we have problems in working memory, as I told you, we can have problems also in math functioning. Also, if we have problems in decoding or in matching a symbol, a numerical symbol, to the meaning of the number, so what I was saying that it was the essence of the math system, so we have to match the number 5 to 5 elements. So this automatic link between these two stimuli or representations can be altered too. So the system is complex. The problems you can have in math functioning can variate as well.
Thank you so much for explaining that. And I think it's very important to understand what can happen if certain areas of the brain are damaged or affected and how it can affect our math abilities.
See, in fact, we are studying the link between aphasia, some aphasic patients coming from lesions in the left hemisphere, although we can have also language problems, as I told you, from the right hemisphere, and math abilities. We are starting to do this kind of research. But, for example, when parietal damage is found, one of the things that is a must to analyze and to assess is math functions, because parietal is per se the most idiosyncratic part of the numerical system. Although, as I told you, it's not as simple because math cognition is more complex than comparing approximate numbers. But if that fails, then there is a very high probability that you have a serious math disability.
I'm very curious, are there any documented cases of people who had certain trauma to their brain or, for example, surgery that needed to be performed due to the tumor resection or epilepsy focus resection who had certain damage to their mass function after?
Yes, in fact, as you know, there is this procedure which is awake surgery, in which you stimulate the different areas before surgery. And with that stimulation, you alter the functioning of that area. And it has been shown, and we have published some papers about that. And we have studied this a lot in compiling different patients. What you have, for example, is an error in retrieving the correct solution of a simple arithmetic problem. For example, Yeah, if I ask you 2 times 4, you say 9, or you say 10, for example, no? So, I mean, there is this transient alteration that you want to spare, and there are, of course, damage in evidently in parietal areas that can lead to an impairment in math to generate what is called acalculia, which is an acquired disorder in math. But there are differences, as I told you, a bit in the same lines that I described the system. In fact, many theories in math cognition were developed as in language from damage from patient data. So patients that have damage in certain brain areas and that derive in specific alterations to numerical processing. So absolutely, yes. Parietal, even perisylvian can be altered, etc. Yeah.
Thank you. Those are very valuable insights. And now I would like to get already closer to the topic of our discussion today,
Yeah.
which is the gender differences and related math abilities. What are the common perceptions about gender differences in math abilities? Where do you think these ideas are coming from?
Yeah. Well, I must say that there is an expert on this who has even reviewed it very recently, which is called Luisa Girelli. And there are, of course, many people that have addressed this. So I base my discussion on my opinion on this opinion, right? So the common perception about the gender difference in math abilities, of course, is an stereotype, is a myth. And of course, a stereotype might be perpetuating itself in the form, in my opinion, of a self-fulfilling prophecy. In a way that you expect, for several reasons, that a male is better at math and it will be better at math, even if you think that this person is going to be better in arts, is going to be better in arts. So my personal conclusion after that is that, of course, this expectancy is going to generate an attitude, and the attitude is going to generate some cognitive approach to the stimulus, which is in this case is math, right? But in any case, having said that, there has been studies addressing, for example, the possible biological basis of this myth, of the fact that, for example, males outperform girls in the higher the problem is. This would be the only real part, perhaps, of the story, but it has a reason, which is not possibly a biological aspect. So there are proposals that says that biological factors can be, for example, hormones, prenatal hormones. So a higher level of testosterone, the baby is exposed, then this is going to affect spatial abilities after birth. And spatial abilities would modulate the math performances. I told you before that they are related. But of course, this is only an explanation in the literature. There are even explanations that base it in an evolutionary approach. For example, saying that for hunting, men had to use more visuospatial abilities, for example, and this again mediates math, no? However, examining the evidence, and I think this is another aspect, if we focus on the very basic capacities I mentioned it before in math, there is no difference between male and female in early years. There are a lot of explanations because there is the myth and there is the higher proportion of male that do hard science in contraposition to other studies. And there is a higher number of males that do works related to hard science. They are better paid. So this myth in the air that even in the social media, public media is filtered by the result. So the result that confirms this view is more popular than others. So this could be a part of the maintenance of this myth, right? But again, if you see the cognitive capacities in children, if you wonder about the real biological basis the precursors of the numerical system afterwards, even that some of these simple initial numerical abilities are related to, it is not that are related to the performance in elder years, when the person becomes an adult, etc., there are no difference in these core capacities. So the core capacities are equal. These capacities can explain the performance in subsequent years, and they are not different, and they explain. So where this come from, then we can examine now the different factors that are modulating this. And basically, it's a problem of expectation. Teachers and parents, according to Girelli.
Yes, so just to confirm that initially, if we're looking at boys versus girls when they're growing up, maybe you
Exactly.
can even say, what age approximately, there is no difference in the capacity. So something starts to
Exactly.
influence that difference as they are growing
Exactly.
up. So there are maybe some historical, some cultural, some psychological factors that are affecting it. So yes, let's look at that. What can be those influences that are leading to?
So we depart from the same, and the stereotype is a reality. There is more emphasis on the stereotype about males outperforming females in math that in reading, which is the opposite. Okay, so that woman outperforming reading to men or children, I mean, is less sustained than the other stereotype. So the stereotype is in the air, and I talk about possible explanations in the biological part. But in fact, what is maintaining this is a very complex interaction of biological, psychological, social, and cultural factors. Okay. So let's imagine the story of a girl. She has the same abilities as a boy. Their parents are impregnated with the stereotype of being, in the extreme case, there can be exceptions, but let's see how this can be sustained. So the girl is exactly the same as a boy, initially, in numerical abilities. The stereotype imposes some expectations on the behavior. We can even think in, as we know, there is another part of psychology that study how behavior is modulated, right? We can even make a language structure to prevail in a person if we reinforce it, right? So some expectations can moldate the auto definition of the girl. So I am less capable as a girl to do this work, no? Then there is another myth, which is that math is difficult, math is dark, and math is cold. So this is also in the equation. So in the sense that first, this girl changes their expectancies, and the approach to the math stimulus is going to be different. Because math is difficult and is more easy for my brother, I'm going to be worse. So my attention to the problem is going to be different.
Yeah.
That is going to modulate the attention of the girl, of course, and the aspects as the working memory. Especially if we take into account that this girl is going to be anxious about the topic because math is difficult. And because math is difficult and I'm supposed to be worse, you have a complex situation in which anxiety is going to block the cognitive systems such as math that requires, of course, working memory, attention, etc., etc. So basically, the basic capabilities that allow a girl to develop a correct, complex numerical system are correct. But from what I see, the overall performance is going to be modulated, but worse attentional capacities, worse use of attention, and a dampened working memory because she's anxious. Math anxiety is a very studied phenomenon in numerical cognition because math is very conditioned by math functioning by anxiety because of this other myth that math are dark, difficult, and and cold, right? So there is an interaction of things. There is expectations driven by the stereotype by fathers, mothers, and teachers. There is the conception that math is difficult, dark, and cold. And this girl is going to be self-perceiving herself as worse in math in something that is difficult. And therefore, this cognitive state, this emotional state, is going to dampen the, of course, good working memory capacity that she has, and of course, attentional capacities that she has. It's a bit complex situation, no? But this is the reason why afterwards there should be less women in hard science, because there is going to be an avoidance to the matter. So, as you can see, the origin of everything is these two stereotypes in the basis of all this self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. So it's like an auto-expectancy that you fulfill as a woman, but the real capacities. So I'm talking about performance, not about capacities. There are the individual difference that explains better the difference in gender than the actual difference in math. There is more inter-individual variability than gender differences. So there is males that are good, males that are bad, women that are good, and women that are bad at math, like in everything. And the evidence, so the real evidence is that, of course, if you see a report of educational systems and educational performance in different countries, you are going to find questions such as, is math difficult, or do you like more reading, etc. So the evidence in this PISA is also that, for example, young women perform worse than young men when the problem gets more and more complex, right? But not in the basic capacities, okay? And the opposite for reading. This means that as the problem gets more complex and there is higher need of executive functions, the performance decrease. And the equation is the same as before. So when you measure the core system of number, there is absolutely no difference. Except, for example, for mental number line representations, but then with age, they disappear. So in earlier age, there is a bit of difference. I don't know if I answered your question. So in brief, evidence about differences in math capacities, there is not evidence of differences in core capacities, the departed capacities, but then there is an interaction of factors that maintain possible differences in the choices afterwards in hard science versus other careers or other studies, which are expectations, math anxiety, and the myth of math, and the stereotype. So the stereotype maintains itself in a way for this complex system. I don't know if I explain myself clearly, but it's a bit complicated. But this is the idea that I really agree. I think it has the point in Luisa Givelli.
Yeah. So it is clear that at the beginning the capacities are the same, but later we see certain differences, and the evidence is that these differences might be due to the various factors, interactions of various factors, and some of them are anxiety about math because of the myths that people are exposed to.
Yes, then there's also the position that the women are more anxious than men, which is controversial as well. There are papers that state that women are more anxious than men. There is more prevalence of, but again, we are in the same story. You know, I mean, it's socially or biologically based. But I think at the end, if you find this is difference at this avoidance of women in certain careers, although this is changing, but it's across societies. There is higher choices of hard science in men than in women, and there is higher choices in men on careers that are related to science. And people who are academics in hard science are more numerous that are men. There is this factor, I think, that is modulating. At the end, math anxiety in my opinion, is what would at the end provoke the avoidance of those careers. Because evidently math anxiety is fear and overactivates certain limbic regions and decrease or executive functions. And so they are not going to be good. I mean, this is the extreme situation that can maintain the difference between genders. And there is a lot of literature studying the actual biological basis for numerical differences between men and women, between girls and boys.
And avoidance, of course, comes from the girls themselves because they get anxious, they get scared about these topics because they're told that they're not as good, but also there are some limited exposure of the girls to math classes that's coming from their parents because they
Exactly.
believe that it's not for them.
Exactly. We could see it as coming from behavioral psychology, no? It's a kind of modification of behavior, no? It's a kind of rewarding what is supposed to be reward or expecting.
Yeah.
Even a smile can, or a face of doubt in a girl when she's doing math can alter the perception the girl has on the math. So even the face expression that a parent can have or a teacher. Of course, it's complex because even in the media, they highlight the confirmation of the myth. And it's so complex to the point that a social factor, such as a stereotype, can modify the brain functions of a girl approaching to math because of the mediation of math anxiety. So it's so complex. It's as complex as that. It doesn't mean that she cannot do it. It's that she's not supposed to be able to do it. She believes she's not able to do it, and she doesn't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know this from cognitive psychology that those perceptions and stereotypes, they modify the behavior of people.
Mhm.
And my question is, are there any studies that are looking at the math abilities of the females from different cultural backgrounds? And why I am asking, because I see so many girls, women are coming from, let's say, China, and they are getting positions in hard math, science, statistics, also engineering, computer science. So maybe there are certain countries, certain cultures at this moment which look a little bit differently at girls.
No,
Yes.
no, the data says that
Yeah.
even in the countries with more gender equality, this happens. Even happens more. This is something of a paradox. What I'm not trying to say is that men are different than women for math. They are not, of course. They are absolutely not, according to literature. But not so much long ago, the woman couldn't get into universities. And not so far ago, the women were thought to be less intelligent because of hormonal aspects. There are even a definition of woman nowadays in terms of cognitive capacities related to hormones, for example, no? In the sense that this is based on historical factors. And of course, we are improving this a lot, but this is an inherited momentum that prevails in society currently. The capacity is the same, the brain is very similar, even though, of course, there is another biological factor that has been considered, and is brain laterality, brain asymmetry, different, that all the time mediates these spatial abilities, which mediates the numerical abilities. I mean, there are explanations, but in a sense, the stereotype of being worse at math makes to believe that logic and even the research is biased towards that sense. So paradoxically, even in cultures where the gender differences are controlled, even there, this complex play exists. And what is the solution? The solution would be to explain this complexity to the society, not trying to see whether it's true or it is false, right? In my opinion, not trying to do studies to support or not support the hypothesis on the capabilities of men and women in math, but to explain the complexity of this aspect, that to leave clear that the initial system is exactly the same. Of course, if there are these differences in brain asymmetries or in brain laterality, this can also be based on a culture, on socialization, on education. Even the biological differences can be explained by the social factors. You, Milena, and me know the plasticity of the brain. And if you are exposed to certain stimuli and to certain processes, you are going to develop more certain aspects than others, and attention is going to guide all this, etc. So even the biological factors, in that sense, can be explained by society.
Yes, absolutely. I absolutely agree. And what you said, that we need to raise that awareness, yes, of those cultural and various factors that are affecting the way things are happening for the girls. And maybe you see already some changes that are happening in education or our society that are helping to improve this situation.
Yes, in my opinion, we are moving forward in all senses. But my perception also from the 90s to now is very different in many aspects in this sense, especially when it comes to differences between males and females. Of course, there are cultural differences, as you said, and there are countries that are more equal, but you have to see the media, which is much better than before, but it's not perfect in a sense. So the stereotypes are still there, so somehow. This is our personal opinion, but the stereotypes are there and we have to fight them still. But yes, there are changes, of course. The society now, academical society, especially if we talk about education, has nothing to do with the society in the 90s at all. It's completely different. And women are in high positions, etc. It is not perfect yet, but it is not completely equal as an average across countries, I mean. Of course, there are extremes in the other sense, as we all know, but the average is improving a lot. And that should change all this,
Yes.
I think.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elena. It's really, really valuable information that you provided to us today. And we know that there are more various myths associated with the math. Can you just tell our listeners some of them to get our listeners curious? Because I know that we will address one more of those myths in our next episode, but we will not tell our listeners which one. We will just make them curious. So,
Yeah, well, we will address the idea that there are math genius, and if so, who are they?
okay. Yes, I think we already made some of our listeners very curious. We will talk about this in our next episode. So, thank you very much, Elena. Thank you for all these valuable insights, for coming and explaining all of that to our listeners. And of course, we wish you all possible success with your studies. And we always are so happy to see you on our podcasts. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on Brain Myth Debunked. We'll continue to explore and debunk more myths about our amazing brains in upcoming episodes. Remember, it's all about learning with all your brain. Until next time, keep thinking smart and feeling deep right from the brain. This podcast was brought to you by the Institute of Neuroapproaches, providing education and career services for people in the field of neuroscience and neurotechnologies. Explore more neuroscience-related educational content at www.neuroapproaches.org. Again, www.neuroapproaches.org.